Welcome. Today we will learn about asynchronous programming, futures, promises, and callbacks with asynchronous programming. First of all, let us understand the differences between synchronous and asynchronous programming. Synchronous program executes from top to bottom. It does not execute the second step until the first step is completely executed. It waits for the previous step to completely execute to go to the next step. A synchronous program also executes from top to bottom, but it does not wait for the first step to completely execute to go to the next step. It executes in multiple threads. For example, let us consider uploading a video in YouTube. If done in synchronous method, after clicking the upload button, we cannot access other fields until the video gets completely uploaded. It results in a poor user experience. If the same task is done in asynchronous method, after clicking the upload button, the uploading process executes in a separate thread. This does not affect the remaining program. So, we can access the other fields and modify them until the video gets uploaded. Futures are standard mechanism for writing multi-threaded code in Scala. Whenever we create a new future operation, Scala spawns a new thread to run that future's code, and after completion, it executes any provided callbacks. The promise is a write handle to a value that will be available at some point in the future. It allows us to put the value of completed asynchronous operation into the future and change the state of the future from not completed to completed by invoking the success method. A future is an object holding a value which may become available at some point. This value is usually the result of some other computation. Future provides a way to reason about performing many operations in parallel in an efficient and non-blocking way. A future is a placeholder object for a value that may not yet exist. The code snippet here shows the execution of FAT to an execution context and stored the result of the computation in inverse future. Future and promises revolve around execution context, responsible for executing computations. An execution context is similar to an executor in Java. It is free to execute computations in new thread, in a pool thread, or in the current thread. However, executing in the current thread is discouraged. By default, futures and promises are non-blocking, making use of callbacks instead of typical blocking operations. To simplify the use of callbacks both syntactically and conceptually, Scala provides combinators such as flat map, for each, and filter used to compose futures in a non-blocking way. If the computation of future is not yet completed, we say that the future is not completed. If the computation has completed with a value or with an exception, we say that the future is completed with that value or with that exception. When a future is completed with a value, we say that the future is completed with that value. When a future is completed with an exception thrown by the computation, we say that the future was failed with that exception. To enable fur comprehensions on a result returned as an exception, future also has projections. If the original future fails, the failed projection returns a future containing a value of type throwable. If the original future succeeds, the failed projection fails with and no such element exception. An important property of future is that it may only be assigned once. Once a value is assigned to a future, it becomes in effect immutable and it can never be overwritten. The simplest way to create future object is to invoke the future.apply method which starts an asynchronous computation and returns a future holding the result of that computation. The result becomes available once the future is completed. Let's assume that we want to use a hypothetical API of some popular social network to obtain a list of friends for a given user. We will open a new session and then send a request to obtain a list of friends of a particular user. We first import the contents of Scala.concurrent package to make the future type visible. We then initialize a session variable which we will use to send requests to the server using a hypothetical create session for method. To obtain the list of friends of a user, a request has to be sent over a network which can take a long time. This is illustrated with the call to the method getFriends that returns a list of friends. To better utilize the CPU, we should not block the rest of the program. This computation should be scheduled asynchronously. The future.apply method exactly does that. It performs the specified computation block concurrently. In this case, sending a request to the server and waiting for the response are performed asynchronously. The list of friends becomes available in the future F once the server responds. We now know how to start an asynchronous computation to create a new future value, but we have not seen how to use the result once it becomes available so that we can do something useful with it. For that, we have to register a callback on the future. Callback is called asynchronously once the future is completed. If the future has already been completed when registering the callback, then the callback may either be executed asynchronously or sequentially on the same thread. The most general form of registering a callback is by using the onComplete method. It allows the client to handle the request of both failed and successful future computations. So far, we have only considered future objects created by asynchronous computations started using the future method. However, futures also can be created using promises. Future in Scala is implemented internally with promise. The term future and promise are often used interchangeably. There are some differences in usage, however. While futures are defined as a type of read-only placeholder object created for a result which does not yet exist, a promise can be thought of as a writable single assignment container which completes a future or which sets the value of the future. A promise can be used to successfully complete a future with a value using the success method. Conversely, a promise can also be used to complete a future with an exception by failing the promise using the failure method. A promise P completes the future returned by P.future. This future is specific to the promise P. Hence, to conclude, future is an object that holds a value that doesn't yet exist. It is immutable once the value is given. Promise is used to successfully complete future either with value or an exception. Thank you.